Senator Wells on debate.
Thank you, Speaker. Honourable colleagues, I rise today to speak on Bill C-45, an act respecting cannabis and to amend the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, the Criminal Code and other acts. I stand here not necessarily to speak for or against this legislation as much as I am to speak up for some of the people who are not in this chamber, who do not have the platform that we have, but who may be more affected by this legislation than any of us. I'm speaking about the children and the youth of our country. Colleagues, nothing I've heard in this debate or discussion so far on this legislation assures me that we're putting them and their interests first, yet we plot their future. I do not wish to disparage the intention of anyone who feels that this legislation improves the current situation. But in my opinion, and in the opinion of the many parents and educators, law enforcement and municipality officials in Newfoundland and Labrador, and indeed across Canada, as well as those in the medical profession I've spoken to about C-45, I fear that this bill will be doing more harm than good. There are real and practical concerns about the health risks of cannabis use, where people will be allowed to smoke these newly legalized products, and what messages we are sending to children and their parents. Listening to the government, it seems that tax revenue and revenue for producers and distributors are more important than protecting children. The government is choosing money over health, growth and development of what we often call our most valuable resource, and our people, and in particular, our young people. I also take issue with the soft truths that proponents of this legislation give, that they are doing us a favour by legalizing a drug which at a population level is, quote, less harmful than alcohol or tobacco. My question is it good or bad, better or worse, for children and young people to breathe marijuana smoke? Would it be better for their growth and development, their dreams and their career ambitions, for their physical health and well-being, and for their families? Colleagues, I know that this legislation still does not permit children to smoke marijuana or youth to smoke marijuana, yet by legalizing it, I believe it will clearly give greater access. They will be subject to the devastating effects of the secondhand smoke. We know many things about the harms associated with cannabis, and I quote Health Canada's April 2017 publication, The Health Effects of Cannabis. The publication talks about the short-term effects on the brain from use of cannabis that can include confusion, fatigue, impaired memory and concentration, anxiety, fear, panic, and even delusions and hallucinations. It also notes that the longer-term effects on the brain from use of cannabis can include an increased risk of addiction, impairment to memory, concentration, intelligence, as well as impairment of one's ability to think clearly and to make decisions. It has been shown that frequent and heavy use of cannabis can affect brain development in children and adolescents. As we have heard, studies have shown brain development continues to 25 years of age. I hope you can see why so many parents are having difficulty believing the line that this will be better and this legislation is good for Canada. How are we supposed to explain to their children when our message is that it's suddenly okay to smoke marijuana? In fact, we're going to make it legal for their parents and older siblings to smoke marijuana. And colleagues, there's a reason why it's called dope. Canada has become a leader in the production and distribution of commercial marijuana products for medicinal uses. I commend the medical community and those in business who have spearheaded and developed this new positive industry. However, just because we've become good at growing, it doesn't deal with the basic problems that underlie this legislation. The recreational marijuana market is estimated to be $22 billion a year. So we're going to have a minimalist and as yet defined public education campaign versus this massive new industry which will no doubt find ways to advertise and promote their products. Our cloudy message to young Canadians is going to be, don't smoke marijuana. Meanwhile, down the road or across the street, you can legally buy it, and we have put the legal and moral stamp of the federal government on it. The real message is that there is nothing wrong with it. In the government's opinion, without this legislation, the rates of Canadians smoking marijuana will increase. However, they offer no such guarantee that rates will decrease as a result of Bill C-45. If and when this legislation becomes law, it should only happen after a long period of massive public education and awareness. In the meantime, children, youth and parents will try to deal with the very real impact that this legislation will have on their lives, their schools and their communities. One of those impacts is likely going to be an increase in impaired driving. As my colleague Senator Manning has pointed out, The experience in Colorado should be instructive. He quotes numbers that state the legalization has doubled the number of drivers involved in fatal crashes who tested positive for marijuana, and in high school, the drug violations have increased 71%. Why is this not the subject matter? While this is not the subject matter of this legislation, it should concern us. We will have more people killed on our roads and our highways, and the innocent law-abiding drivers and those walking on the sidewalks will be injured and will be killed. And we in this chamber may be contributing to that. That is not a debatable item to parents in Colorado. It is a fact, and it will be a fact here in Canada. The bottom line of this debate should not be measuring how much of the marijuana money will be made or how the proceeds will be divided. It should be based on good public policy that minimizes the risk and maximizes protection. Colleagues, the government's stated goal is to keep marijuana out of the hands of criminals and youth, but hidden away in Division 1, Section 8, Sub 1C is a clause stating, youth ages 12 to 17 will be able to possess up to 5 grams of dried cannabis before facing criminal charges. Colleagues, to me, this is shocking. I want to close my remarks on this legislation by referring to a couple of documents that have been prepared by organizations with some expertise in health matters affecting youth. And we've heard some of those some of those reports already today. The Canadian Psychiatric Association position statement, written in 2017 on this issue, says that there needs to be a focus on children and young people because mental health disorders and substance abuse often start in this age group. They note that cannabis is the most widely used drug among Canadian youth, with 22% of 15 to 19-year-olds admitting to having used it in the past year. They go on to say that regular use of cannabis by youth can have negative effects on, quote, cognition, including attention, memory, processing speed, visuospatial functioning, and overall intelligence. Early use of cannabis by young people increases the likelihood of developing a primary psychotic illness among those who are vulnerable. The Canadian Psychiatric Association calls for cannabis to be legalized only for those over 21 years of age and suggests that limits on its potency and quantity should apply until the age of 25. The Canadian Psychiatric Association also identifies an increased risk of schizophrenia and depression, as well as the earlier onset of symptoms of psychosis and bipolar disorder among young people regularly using cannabis. Additionally, colleagues, there is a paper from the Canadian Pediatric Society entitled Cannabis and Canada's Children and Youth. It states that, quote, cannabis use during adolescence can cause functional and structural changes to the developing brain, leading to damage. It also writes, in 2010, Canadian youth ranked first for cannabis use among 43 countries and regions across Europe and North America, with 1/3 of youth, regardless of gender, having tried cannabis at least once by the age of 15. Their conclusion states, quote, youth should not use cannabis recreationally because it has many potentially harmful effects that are serious. These effects are present in the entire population. However, the developing brain is especially sensitive to the negative consequences of cannabis use. Canadian youth are at significant risk for developing cannabis use disorder and possibly for doubling their risk of having a psychotic illness. Driving under the influence of cannabis increases the risk for motor vehicle accidents, and we know that cannabis use affects judgment. Where cannabis has been legalized in the USA, children are requiring emergent medical care at greater rates due to unintentional ingestion. Colleagues, that's not my opinion, that's from the report. Honourable colleagues, I want to add this information and my thoughts to the official records of our debates here in the Senate to help us understand the severity of the impact of any decision that we make with this proposed legislation. If there was ever a time for the Senate to exercise its capacity for sober second thought, it is now. Thank you.
Senator Lankin, you have a question?
Yes.
Senator Wells, would you accept a question?
Sorry, who's the question from? Oh, sorry, Senator Lang.
Now you better say
Well,
it.
then, no. Yes, I'll accept the question.
My friend and colleague, thank you very much for taking a question. I appreciate the entirety of the case that you put forward, and I don't want to diminish from that by zeroing in on asking a question on one point. I share many of the same concerns that you have. I come from a probably different end perspective in terms of my belief that the war on drugs has not worked and that we need a public health approach. Whether or not this one makes the grade, I think, is what is being discussed. But when you said that you found a clause hidden, that, I don't think it's hidden, but that would not criminalize young people for possession under a certain amount, you talked about it as that you were shocked that they wouldn't be charged criminally. My understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that they're still subject to offense, but a provincial offense as opposed to a criminal code offense. Are you suggesting that it would be better in the context of this to actually criminalize those young people?
Senator Lankin, not at all, not at all. But by defining it like that, it gives tacit approval to have it. And that's my concern about it. And I did find it hidden there. I don't know if you've ever read an omnibus bill. There are lots of things hidden in there. This is a bill that covers the full gamut, but doesn't go far enough in many cases of the marijuana legislation, legalization legislation. The fact that it's in there and states, why doesn't it say from age 1 to age 17? I think that it's giving tacit approval. If it doesn't specifically state it is illegal to have it, it gives tacit approval to use it or to have it. And to have it means to use it or sell it or be part of it.